November 17, 2023. The visible video shows a Ukrainian FPV drone chasing a Russian truck on the front line. The footage shows the drone catching up with the fast-moving vehicle, which in response begins to veer off route in an attempt to escape. The truck managed to avoid the first attack when the man tried to fire. However, on the next attempt, the vehicle failed to escape. On November 15th, Russian forces continued their offensive operations along the Kupiansk-Svatovi-Kreminna line, with confirmed advances. Geolocated material published the day before suggested that the Russians had moved slightly east of Ivanivka, 20 kilometers southeast of Kupiansk, and west of Volodymyrivka, 19 kilometers northwest of Swatov. A Russian millblogger associated with Kremlin circles claimed that Russian forces were moving on the outskirts of Sinkovka, 9 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk, and around Timkivka, 19 kilometers east of Kupiansk, to surround the settlement. Another Russian millblogger reported the advance of Russian forces near Lyman Pershi, 12 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk, Kislivka, 22 kilometers southwest of Kupiansk, and Makivka, 22 kilometers northwest of Kreminaya. However, the Institute for War Studies, ISW, has not observed any visual evidence of these alleged advances. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces unsuccessfully attacked towards Kupiansk, near Sinkovka, Petropavlovka, 7 kilometers east of Kupiansk, and Ivanivka, as well as towards Lyman near Nadia, 16 kilometers west of Swatovka, and in the Serebryansk forest area. On the other hand, Russian sources reported that on November 15th, Ukrainian forces carried out assaults on the Kupiansk-Kreminna line, but failed to achieve any alleged or confirmed progress. The Russian Ministry of Defense, MOD, said that elements of the western grouping of Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Sinkivka, the former village of Zahorikovka, 16 kilometers east of Kupiansk, Hirorivka, 10 kilometers south of Kreminaya, and Serebyanka, 11 kilometers southwest of Kreminaya. Russian millbloggers also claimed that Ukrainian forces were attacking a forest area west of Kreminna and trying to push Russian forces out of Torske, 15 kilometers west of Kreminna. The footage shows a Russian tank and 2 armored vehicles trying to attack Ukrainian positions while moving through a tree line. However, one of the Ukrainian tanks precisely fires at them, which results in their destruction. Both armored vehicles are torn to pieces, and the Russian tank is reduced to a smoking wreck. At the beginning of summer, Ukraine launched a counterattack in this area with the aim of reaching Mariupol. Despite this attack did not produce the intended results and stalled, leaving the front line now static. Russian forces continued their attacks along Bakhmut's northern and southern flanks on November 15th. Geolocated material published the day before indicated Russian activities on the southwestern outskirts of Bakhmut, as well as possible activities near this city already before November 14th. Russian millbloggers claimed that Russian forces had moved to Bakhmut's northern flank near Berkivka, 4 kilometers north of Bakhmut, and Yahidne, 2 kilometers north, fortifying new positions near the Berkivka reservoir. A millblogger associated with Kremlin circles reported that unspecified elements of the Russian airborne forces tried to regain lost positions by moving 500 meters in an unspecified area south of the Berkivka reservoir. Another millblogger claimed that Ukrainian forces have lost almost all of the territory captured in the spring and summer of 2023 around Berkovka and Yakhidny. Russian millbloggers also reported that Russian forces had advanced into forest areas near Klishchiok, 7 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut, gaining a foothold on the northern outskirts of the settlement. They also claimed that Russian and Ukrainian forces were actively fighting for control of key heights near Klishchiyovka, with the Ukrainians continuing to hold key heights west of the settlement. A Russian millblogger claimed that Andriivka, 10 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut, remains disputed and that Russian forces control Kurdyumovka, 12 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut. Another Russian millblogger reported on the activities of elements of the Russian Spetsnaz unit Sibir near Klishchivka. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces repelled all Russian attacks near Bodanivka, 5 kilometers northwest of Bakhmut, Ivanovske, 5 kilometers west of Bakhmut, Klishchevka, and Andriivka. Ukrainian Ground Forces spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Volodymyr Fityo said Russian forces were likely preparing to launch new attacks by increasing artillery fire around Bakhmut. During the Russian attacks in Kherson on November 16th, a 75-year-old woman in her apartment lost her life. At least 8 people were injured in the same attack, including a 15-year-old girl. This information was provided by Governor Oleksandr Prokudin. 6 of the injured people were transported to hospital and 2 were provided with medical assistance at the scene. The attacks also resulted in damage to houses and other civilian infrastructure. At the time of publication of this news, the number of additional victims and the scale of destruction were not yet certain. Prokudin did not provide details about the type of weapon used in the attack. Additionally, on the same day, November 16th, Russian attacks on the town of Bielzerka, also located in Kherson Oblast, killed 1 person and injured at least 4 others. The footage, recorded from a first-person perspective, shows scenes of shooting in Donbas. Ukrainian troops fought a battle with the Russians in the Serebrian Forest, located west of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. The recording shows the Ukrainians attacking their opponents with rocket launchers, which leads to an intense exchange of fire between both sides. The next scenes show heavy fighting as the Ukrainians charge forward. The Serebrian Forest is not considered a major front for either side in the conflict, but it has nonetheless been the site of occasional clashes between them. Most of the significant progress in the conflict takes place further north or south of this location. According to unconfirmed information from Russian sources on November 15th, Russian forces continued their advance around Avdiivka. A Russian mill blogger claimed that the Russians had pushed Ukrainian forces from their position near a garbage heap north of Avdiivka and occupied at least 60% of the industrial area south of the city. One Russian mill blogger reported that Russian forces had moved south of the heap, taking over several unspecified Ukrainian positions. A prominent Russian blogger claimed that Russian forces had pushed Ukrainians out of steppe 3 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka, and that the area was now disputed. He added that the Russians had advanced north of Pervomaisky, 11 kilometers southwest of Avdiivka, had driven Ukrainian forces out of unspecified processing plants southeast of the garbage heap, and had consolidated control over the eastern outskirts of the steppe, moving along the railway tracks. Mill blogger noted that Russian forces did not move towards Sieverna, 6 kilometers west of Avdiivka, or Tonenka, 5 kilometers west, without directly attacking Avdiivka or the Avdiivka coking plant. Another mill blogger claimed that Russian forces are in no hurry to advance north of Avdiivka to avoid unnecessary losses. Another Russian mill blogger reported that the Russians carried out simultaneous offensive operations near Stepa, Sievern, and Pervomaisky, west of Kamyonka, 5 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka, near a water treatment plant and in an industrial area. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces repelled Russian attacks east of Novokalinov, 11 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka, and Pervomayivka, and near Avdiivka, Severny, Tonenka, and Vodyane, 7 kilometers southwest of Avdiivka. On November 15th, Ukrainian forces conducted intensive operations on the eastern left bank of the Kherson Oblast, going beyond normal operations. Russian mill bloggers claimed that Ukraine launched unsuccessful attacks from the center of Krinky, 30 kilometers northeast of Kherson, 200 meters from the Dnieper River, and about 3.5 kilometers north of the E58 highway. In addition, they reported Ukrainian attacks near Poima, 11 kilometers east of Kherson and 4 kilometers from the Dnieper River, and Pishchenivka, 15 kilometers east of Kherson and 3 kilometers from the Dnieper River. Russian mill bloggers also claimed that Russian forces prevented the evacuation of victims and the deployment of additional Ukrainian personnel on the eastern bank near the Antonivsky Road Bridge. In turn, the spokeswoman of the Ukrainian Southern Operational Command, Captain First Class Natalia Humenyuk, stated that Ukrainian forces were pushing Russian forces 3 to 8 kilometers from the eastern bank of the Dnieper River in Kherson Oblast. The geographic scope of the activities described is much larger than what the open source evidence supports. Russian forces attacked a Ukrainian-held area on the eastern bank of Kherson Oblast during continuing operations against Ukrainian positions on the eastern bank the same day. Geolocated material published on November 14th shows some advances of Russian forces towards Krinky. Russian milbloggers claimed that Russian forces counterattacked and forced Ukrainian forces to withdraw from some areas south of Krinky, near Kazachi-Laheri, 23 kilometers northeast of Kherson, and 2 kilometers from the Dnieper River and near the Antonov Bridge. However, ISW did not confirm these claims. Ukrainian military observer Konstantin Mashovets said Russian forces likely developed a plan to eliminate Ukrainian positions on the eastern bank by creating 3 tactical groups. Mashovets stated that 2 groups were to flank the Oleshki-Nova Kakhovka road and the Krinky area from the Korsenko area, 45 kilometers northeast of Kherson and 1 kilometer from the Dnieper River, and Cossack-Laheri, and the 3rd group was to attack south of Krinky and move north. The Wall Street Journal, citing Ukrainian soldiers fighting on the eastern shore, reports that Russian forces are using heavy mines, infiltration tactics, snipers, heavy artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, MLRS, and airstrikes to defend against the Ukrainian advance into the eastern edge.